There is one fact that very few people have ever stopped to consider. Before dinosaurs took their first steps across the land, and before the skies echoed with the roars of flying reptiles, there was a struggle for survival, even more brutal than anything Hollywood has ever brought to the screen. It did not unfold on land, but hundreds of meters beneath the surface, in the cold darkness of Earth's ancient oceans. Alright, we call Earth the blue planet. But there was once an age when that blue was anything but peaceful. It was the color of blood, diffusing through seawater. The color of colossal shadows gliding beneath the faint sunlight filtering through the waves. The color of a world where every creature, no matter how enormous, could become the next meal for something even larger. 250 million years ago, the oceans were not a place for a relaxing swim. They were a battlefield where evolution showed mercy to no one. Today, we are going to dive back through hundreds of millions of years of Earth's history to confront the creatures that once ruled the deepest waters. And at the end of this journey, we will arrive at a name that even the most serious scientists speak of with caution. Because there is one question about this creature that science still cannot answer with certainty. Did it truly disappear forever? Or is it simply hiding in a place no human has ever reached? Keep that question in the back of your mind. We'll come back to it. But first, our journey must begin where it all started, deep beneath the seas of the Devonian period, more than 400 million years ago, when the oceans gave rise to the first predator, powerful enough to shatter every rule of nature. Imagine an ocean with no sharks, no whales, and none of the large vertebrates we are familiar with today. That was the Devonian Ocean, an era that paleontologists proudly call the Age of Fishes. But behind that seemingly harmless name lurked one of the most terrifying predators ever to exist in the history of life on Earth. Its name was Dunkleosteus. It had no scales like a shark. It had no teeth in the way we usually imagine. Instead, the front half of Dunkleosteus was protected by massive bony armor plates, as hard as steel, and rather than teeth, it possessed two self-sharpening bony blades that honed themselves every time it bit, a brutally effective evolutionary adaptation so ruthless that many of its contemporaries had no defense against it. Scientists have estimated the bite force of Dunkleosteus, and the numbers are astonishing. The bite force at the front of its jaws may have rivaled that of some of the largest carnivorous dinosaurs ever to exist, even though it lived entirely underwater hundreds of millions of years before the first dinosaurs appeared. With such tremendous force, Dunkleosteus could pierce the armored plating of its own kind, and numerous fossils bear the scars of violent bite marks from other individuals, evidence of a brutal behavior. Cannibalism when prey became scarce. This is the first lesson the ancient oceans teach us. From the very beginning, as complex life flourished in the seas, the strongest was not the most beautiful, nor the most intelligent. It was the one armed with the most ruthless weapons, and willing to use them without mercy. Yet as terrifying as Dunkleosteus was, it was only the opening chapter. The oceans would need more than 100 million additional years of evolution before producing their truly formidable rulers, creatures that were not only enormous, but also swift, intelligent, and the embodiment of one of evolution's greatest paradoxes. They had originally evolved on land, only to return to the sea and become its ultimate predators. Around 250 million years ago, following one of the most devastating mass extinctions in Earth's history, an event that wiped out nearly 90% of all marine species, the oceans were left almost empty. And within that vast ecological void, a remarkable evolutionary experiment began. Their ancestors had once lived on land and breathed air with lungs, yet they chose to return to the water. The result of that experiment was Ichthyosaurus, a creature whose body was almost a perfect parallel to that of the modern dolphin, despite the fact that the two were not closely related at all. It remains one of the classic examples of convergent evolution ever documented by science. When the ocean demands the same streamlined body for fast swimming, two completely unrelated evolutionary lineages, separated by hundreds of millions of years, can independently arrive at almost exactly the same design. Ichthyosaurus was not only an exceptionally fast swimmer, it also possessed what is believed to have been one of the largest eyes, relative to body size, ever recorded in any vertebrate. Those enormous eyes allowed it to hunt even in the dark depths of the ocean, where sunlight could barely penetrate. But if Ichthyosaurus was the embodiment of speed and refinement, then the next creature in our story represented something entirely different. Raw power magnified to the point of legend. Liopleurodon, a name forever linked to one of the most controversial portrayals in the history of science documentaries. A famous documentary once depicted it as reaching a length of 25 meters and outweighing even some of the largest whales alive today. Years later, paleontologists corrected that claim, explaining that its actual size was far more modest, perhaps only about 1/3 of what the documentary had asserted. Yet that correction did nothing to make Liopleurodon any less terrifying. With its short, muscular neck and a massive head that accounted for nearly 1/4 of its total body length, Liopleurodon possessed one of the most powerful jaws ever to evolve in the prehistoric oceans. It did not need to be the longest creature to become the most feared predator in its waters. It only needed a bite that nothing could withstand. Liopleurodon teaches us a second lesson about the ancient oceans. Sometimes it is humanity itself, with its imagination and its fears, that transforms monsters into creatures even larger than reality. But even after stripping away every exaggeration, the scientific truth remains more than enough to send a chill down anyone's spine. Then, as we enter the Cretaceous period, the final chapter before the extinction of the dinosaurs, the oceans witnessed the rise of the most terrifying rulers the ancient world had ever known. If there was ever an age when the oceans reached the pinnacle of brutality, it was the Cretaceous period, roughly 100 million to 66 million years ago. This was a time when evolution seemed to know no limits, producing predators whose size and power surpassed anything that had ever existed beneath the sea. At the top of that list stood Mosasaurus, a name many people recognize from the big screen. Yet the scientific reality is even more astonishing than any cinematic portrayal. Mosasaurus was neither a dinosaur nor a fish. It was a gigantic marine lizard, more closely related to modern snakes and monitor lizards than to any other group of marine reptiles. Reaching lengths of more than 15 meters, armed with dagger-sharp teeth arranged in multiple rows, and equipped with a highly specialized jaw that allowed it to swallow prey nearly as large as its own head, Mosasaurus was more than just a predator. It was the ultimate symbol of power in the ancient oceans. Fossil evidence reveals that Mosasaurus fed on almost anything it encountered: fish, sea turtles, and even smaller marine reptiles, including members of its own species. But even an apex predator like Mosasaurus was not without rivals. During the same era, in distant waters, another formidable creature was quietly establishing its dominance with a weapon both simple and deadly. A pair of jaws whose bite force has been compared to that of the most fearsome, carnivorous dinosaurs ever to walk the earth. That creature was Kronosaurus, a short-necked plesiosaur, with a head measuring nearly 1/3 of its total body length. Virtually every part of that massive skull served a single purpose: to crush anything unfortunate enough to fall within its reach. With jaws engineered to maximize crushing power, Kronosaurus perfectly embodied an unchanging principle of the ancient oceans. You did not have to be the largest animal, you only had to possess the most devastating weapon to become the terror of an entire sea. At this point in history, if you had to choose one of the creatures we've discussed to dive alongside, Dunkleosteus with its self-sharpening biting blades, Ichthyosaurus with its remarkable speed and enormous eyes, Liopleurodon with a head that made up 1/4 of its body, or Mosasaurus and Kronosaurus with their overwhelming power, which one would you choose? It is a question that even paleontologists often debate, because each of these animals represents an entirely different strategy for survival. Yet, as terrifying as they all were, none of them was the ancient ocean's final ruler. There was another name, a name that, by itself, is enough to send a chill down the spine, a name that has transcended the boundaries of science to become part of popular culture, the subject of blockbuster films, and even conspiracy theories that persist to this day. Now imagine a great white shark, the most formidable marine predator still alive today, typically measuring about 4 to 6 meters in length. Now triple that size. That is the scale of Megalodon, the colossal shark that dominated oceans around the world from approximately 23 million years ago until its extinction about 3.6 million years ago. With an estimated length of as much as 15 to 18 meters, Megalodon was one of the largest predatory fish ever to exist in the history of life on Earth. Its fossilized teeth, some larger than the hand of an adult human, are still discovered on ocean floors around the world today, silent reminders of an era when the seas were ruled by a predator with no true equal. Scientists estimate that Megalodon's bite force may have exceeded that of any other animal for which bite force has ever been estimated, including the mighty Tyrannosaurus rex. Armed with that extraordinary bite and serrated teeth designed to slice effortlessly through flesh and bone, Megalodon was capable of hunting the largest prey in the oceans of its time, including ancient whales comparable in size to, or even larger than, some of the largest whales living today. But then, about 3.6 million years ago, Megalodon disappeared from the fossil record. No younger teeth have ever been found beyond that point in time. Scientists have proposed several explanations for its extinction. Global climate change cooled the oceans, shrinking the warm water habitats Megalodon preferred. Competition for food intensified as new predators emerged, including the ancestors of today's killer whales, and the populations of the large whales that Megalodon depended on for survival began to decline. This brings us back to the question we raised at the very beginning. Our oceans are almost unimaginably vast. More than 80% of the seafloor has never been mapped in detail, and much of the deepest ocean remains completely mysterious to modern science. It is precisely that immense scale and mystery that continue to fuel a question many people find irresistible, even though the overwhelming scientific consensus is that the answer is almost certainly no. Could a small population of megalodons still exist, hidden somewhere in the deepest parts of the ocean that no human has ever reached? Based on the evidence available today, the answer strongly points to no. From an ecological standpoint, it is virtually impossible for an animal as enormous as Megalodon, one that would require an immense amount of food to survive, to remain completely hidden without leaving a single trace. No carcasses washing ashore, no distinctive bite marks on modern whales, and no genetic evidence whatsoever. Yet it is that very question that vast gap between what humanity knows and what the oceans may still conceal, that continues to keep Megalodon alive in our imagination millions of years after it is believed to have vanished. From Dunkleosteus with its self-sharpening biting blades during the Devonian period, to Ichthyosaurus and Liopleurodon of the Triassic and Jurassic periods, to Mosasaurus and Kronosaurus, which ruled the Cretaceous period, and finally to Megalodon, the ultimate predator whose shadow still looms over the human imagination millions of years after its disappearance. They all tell us the same story. It is the story of a planet where the oceans, not the land, were the true stage upon which evolution displayed both its greatest brutality and its greatest creativity. It was a world where immense size, overwhelming power, and ruthless efficiency were not exceptions. They were the rules of survival. And perhaps the most astonishing fact is not the monsters we have explored together today, but something much simpler. More than 80% of the oceans on our own planet remain unexplored in detail. In that profound darkness, who knows how many more chapters of the story of evolution are still waiting to be discovered, or were written millions of years ago and now lie silently beneath layers of sediment, waiting for someone to uncover them by chance? And if you had the opportunity to travel back in time, to dive into the oceans of the Cretaceous period where Mosasaurus and Kronosaurus patrolled their domain, would you dare take the plunge?